I'm Congressman John Lewis from Atlanta, Georgia. I fought too hard and too long against discrimination based on race and color, not to stand up and speak up against discrimination against our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. I see the right to marriage as a civil rights issue. You cannot have rights for one segment of the population or one group of people and not for everybody. Civil rights and equal rights must be for all of God's children. No government, state or federal, have the right to discriminate against someone because of the color of their skin or sexual orientation. I see marriage equality as a step, a necessary step in completing the long, hard struggle, what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community. But we will lay down the burden of prejudice and just let people love each other. That's why I'm a Southerner, for the freedom to marry. I look forward to the day, not just in the state of Georgia, but all across the American South and all across our country, when the question of being free to fall in love and marry whoever you please will no longer be an issue. And that day will come. It will come in America in our lifetime.
Hot topics here in Georgia, marriage equality. Well, we have a panel here of people who are engaged at different levels on the struggle and the fight for equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. And so we're really here to have a dialogue about our beloved community and to really set a context for where we are now. And I would like to start with a story before I engage my colleagues here. I'd like to share a story, a personal story of actually what inspired me to do what I do and what has brought me here. And as quiet as it's kept, as they say here, it has something to do with marriage equality. On April 4th, 1968, in Washington, D.C., I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was a junior in high school. And that weekend, as we know, was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. I was in a high school sorority. We were having our annual conference. We had girls coming from New York to Virginia. And we were at the Washington Hilton Hotel. At noon, we were informed that Dr. King had been assassinated and that there was violence happening across the country, including in the city of Washington, D.C., and that the city was going on curfew, and the National Guard was being called in to monitor the city. There were about 150 of us, black teenagers, at the Washington Hilton Hotel. We were the only black people there other than the service staff. And we were hysterical when we heard that heard that news. And when we looked around, there was nobody else in that hotel responding the way that we were responding to this news. It was horrifying. We were hysterical. Our sponsors said to us, you can't leave. Back then we didn't have cell phones, smartphones, or anything like that. Our parents knew that we were at the hotel with sponsors safe. They said, we're going to stay here this weekend because we can't go anywhere else, and you're going to learn about social justice in this country. More specifically, you're going to learn about the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so we said, okay. We didn't know a lot about that. But we went up to our hotel rooms, and we could look out our hotel room windows. And Washington, if you know Washington, D.C., it has a height ordinance. And we could see U Street in Washington, D.C. starting to go up in flames. That terrified us even more. And so that weekend, we learned about the work of social justice in this country, and we learned about Dr. King's work. And we were able to take the anger of that fire and turn it around to do positive work. I knew then that I wanted to work for social justice. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I went back to school and I was ready to go. I had my Angela Davis fro, and it was then that I declared that I was going to marry a politician in Washington, D.C. and tell him what to do. Because they were not doing a good job of connecting with the people. And so fast forward 45 years later, 46 years later, I guess I'm the politician that I was supposed to marry. So I share that story because it sort of sets the context for what fueled my fire to want to fight for justice. And it wasn't until the late 80s that I began to see that my work for social justice was going to be in the lesbian and gay community. So for me, it was about connecting the dots, not just a single issue, because when I looked in the mirror, the last time I saw a woman, African American, lesbian, now I'm aging, so I bring all of those issues to the table. And so I wanted to share that story of how I got here. But we're going to hear from my colleagues as well in terms of their experiences. So Nancy has been gracious enough to time us because we can go on, and you'll get a 2-minute warning when it's time for you to wrap up. And I'm going to start by asking each of you, how did you come to be a part of this panel today? And so I want to start with Robin, and then we'll go to Susan and Brandon and Conrad. So, Robin.
Thank you. Can you all hear me with my mic? Okay. And I am going to talk about how I came to be here, but also have been asked to talk a little bit about the law in a way that's interesting and doesn't bore you, which is a real challenge. I've worked very hard on that. So, why are we here? So, you know, the easy answer is that the United States Supreme Court, and we're here for many reasons, but most recently, most excitingly, the United States Supreme Court in June of this past year ruled in the Edie Windsor versus United States case, striking down a large portion of what is called, incorrectly, the Defense of Marriage Act. That case is on its face very exciting and symbolically tremendous. And so I want to talk about both, and I want to talk about why this happening in the Supreme Court makes it that much more important. The Defense of Marriage Act basically said that in the United States, marriage is only between a man and a woman, period. And for all these federal laws that give people rights, that give them benefits, that save them money, that show them respect, if you are a same-gender couple, you don't cut it. You're not good enough, and you're not entitled to all of that. And so as a lesbian, that message really strikes at who I am, because while many people, I think, try to marginalize gay men and lesbians by who they have sex with, what it's really about is who we love. And when people say our love is not as good as heterosexual love, it hurts. So when the Supreme Court understood that DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, violated the constitutional rights of gay men and lesbians, that was huge. So that's on the surface. The Supreme Court. Why is the Supreme Court a big deal? Well, I'm going to go back a little bit. Congress makes our laws. The executive branch, our president, primarily executes the laws, but the courts are the ones that interpret them. And over 2 centuries ago, the United States Constitution was drafted and then amended with 10 articles called the Bill of Rights. And they're the basic rights that Americans are cloaked with. And it's written like really vaguely, the right to bear arms. You know, we have all this stuff going on about guns. All it says is we have the right to bear arms. So the people who interpret what these constitutional amendments mean are the courts. And the courts are sort of like a system. There's courts in the states. There's like Georgia, all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court. And then there are federal courts. And both the state courts and the federal courts wind all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Both sides go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court has the final say about what the Constitution means. And so these local courts will make a decision, and it will apply only to the state of Georgia or to a few states that the federal appeals court covers. But when the United States Supreme Court says what the Constitution means, they speak for the entire country. So when the United States Supreme Court says that DOMA violates the constitutional rights of gay men and lesbians, that affects every single citizen in this country. It is the law of the land. It's incredibly powerful. And 9 justices, 9 people, get the right to determine that. It's a big deal. Interestingly, the federal courts are created by the Constitution. And the reason that's done is because they wanted to create a body of our government that wasn't affected by politics. So these 9 people and all the other federal court judges, they're there for life. So someone said to me very interestingly, because they're there for life, actually the views of the people who are on the court now don't necessarily reflect the views of the younger generation coming up. Because they're there till they're really, really old. And, you know, times change. But they're not supposed to be affected by politics. When they decide what rights the Constitution gives to people, they're not supposed to be swayed by whether they're Republican or Democrat or whether they're getting voted into office next time around. Now, it's not true in Georgia, by the way. So when you hear about Georgia judges being elected, they're not in that federal system. The United States Supreme Court is federal. Oh, I get extra time because I'm doing the law. Is that okay? Sorry, guys. So I haven't gotten to me yet. Okay. So, all right, now I got to hurry up. The reality is that the courts are affected by politics. I mean, we see it. And so, while they're not elected, they watch what's going on in the country. And you'll see that the timing of rulings that deal with human rights often reflect a movement in the country. The courts watch where the country is, and typically they sort of go along with the flavor of the country. So when the DOMA case happened, and the United States Supreme Court threw out DOMA, even though it threw it out for all the federal laws, what it means is that people now that are all in the various states and their state laws, they're not affected by this, all right? So if you're in a state like New York, let's say, I think there are 17 of them now that recognize gay marriage. If you're in a state that recognizes gay marriage, you're good. If you're in a state like Georgia that doesn't recognize gay marriage, you're not. And so the United States is a patchwork of states where gay men and lesbians have equal rights in terms of marriage equality. Obviously, we don't have equal rights in many other areas. We're just talking about marriage equality. And states where they don't. And what's happening is that there are cases being filed all over the place because the general sense is that the United States Supreme Court will take another case in the next 1 or 2 years and will rule on gay marriage across the board, on marriage equality as the law of the land. Is it unconstitutional to deny gay men and lesbians the right to marry if they want to? You know, some people don't want to have anything to do with marriage. That's fine. But in a free society, people should have the same right to do it or not do it. It's up to you. The option is yours. And so if the Supreme Court gets that case and is going to rule on that, organizations that are organizing around this want the court to see that the states, the citizens, are behind this because the court will be influenced. And so you have educational panels and court cases going on so that people get educated. I have to wrap up? I'm done.
Great, thank you, Ellen. Thank you. Susan.
I'm going to have the same problem.
Well,
So,
you have to.
okay. So actually, I was thinking about why am I here? I came out as a lesbian in my mid-20s, and all of the work I've done since then up until now is creating space for myself and for my family, for my kids, making the world a safer place by taking up space. So that's really why I'm here, just continuing that process. I'm going to be talking really about families with children. I've got to keep it real narrow. That's all I'm talking about. I'm really not, even though I spent a lot of my life and work, professional life, talking about creating family with couples without children, I've just got to put that over here for the time being. And I want to just give you a couple of statistics. I've got to put this in context, because we're talking about the state of Georgia in 2014. That's where we are, right? So in the 2000 census, so that was 14 years ago, 96% of the, that was the 1 year that we got to be able to put down whether you were lesbian, gay, and stuff on the census form. So that's the only time we have, year we have data for. In the 2000 census, 96% of the counties in the whole United States reported having at least one LGBT family raising children, including every single county in Georgia. Self-reported raising kids in a lesbian and gay family. That was 14 years ago. Another thing, it was 16 years ago that we were able to do that. That's when I went back and looked, 1998. That was 16 years ago that we were able, with the help of loads of other people, to complete the first second parent adoption in the state of Georgia. It was wonderful. With regard to, then this is again looking at the numbers. With regard, we're talking about people who are out first at the moment. I'm not even now talking about people in heterosexual marriages who had children and then got in other relationships. I'm talking about being out first. With regard to being out first and then having children, my children at age 26 and 27 were on the top end of the oldest age group in Georgia. There were two other families and ourselves. So we had three families where the people were out first and then had kids. Both coasts are 10 years ahead of us. So that means that the children in those families are now pushing 40. Okay, and you think how many people are then across the United States? So let me talk about how I think about families. And I'm going to use the image of a fruit in a bowl. So here's a bowl, a container. That is the container, the structure of a family. Inside that is the fruit, which is the quality of the connections between people. But we're talking about strengthening the bowl. What makes a bowl, what makes a family. And I am talking about family here, not everybody that might love your kids. And we are talking about love, but love does not make a family. You want loads of people to love your kids, they are not your family. So what makes a family is your intent. That's what behind, if you want to marry, it's the intention. Who are you intending to have as part of your family? So here you have a bowl created primarily out of intent. And so being able to marry will indeed, or can indeed, strengthen that bowl for children. It can strengthen it in terms of economics, including access to health care. You can get people on each other's insurance. You can do all kinds of stuff like that. You can get Social Security payments, all kinds of stuff. If you can get the right to marry, that will help kids. The other thing that being able to marry does in terms of strengthening the bowl for the kids is it validates your relationship, it validates your family. It's external sense that my family is good too. What it doesn't do, okay, so here's your bowl, and I got to figure out somebody. So here's two parents. For the sake of my diagram up here, you've got two kids. You don't have to. You could have one or 18. Or you got two kids. Lesbian and gay, as far as I still know, you have to have an egg, a sperm, and a womb. All right? We haven't quite gotten beyond that yet, which means that genetically, both people are not related to both kids. You can't have that, okay? And legally, one person is most often the legal parent of one or both kids. Okay, so you can't depend on genetics to have a legal connection between the parent-child. You cannot depend on legal ways to have a connection between a parent and child. Going back to the state of Georgia, second parent adoption is the way that can happen. All these counties in Georgia, if you've ever looked at a map, they're tiny little counties all over the state. There's only a handful of counties in which successful second parent adoptions are done. A second parent adoption, in case you don't know, means that the person who's got the legal connection to the children does not have to relinquish their rights in order for another person to be able to be another parent. So there are very few people in the state of Georgia who have the option of doing that. The marriage per se will not make both people legal parents of the kids. It does open a window, which is that if both parents are married, it offers the option of a step-parent adoption instead of a second-parent adoption. But it's just a window of opportunity. And we're talking about Georgia. We're in Georgia in 2014. Okay? So, so we talk about how do you define family then? And as I was saying, absent a genetic or legal connection, the only way to really do that is intentional family. You decide who are your parents. And the reason this is important for a child, because a family is the place where the child develops. You want that to be the safest, most strong kind of place for a child to develop. And so you want that child to feel okay. And one part of developing is the child saying, who am I? And that means relationally. Who is my parent? Who are my parents? Who are my extended family? And that's a primitive, basic, core concept about who am I? And so the parents, the adults, have to decide how they're going to answer that question. I have been privileged to sit in and listen over all these years to many different forms of how families create structure. So let me go back just a moment. Margin to center. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that as we built our families, we have, and that means couples and with children, we've lived on the margin. We have not had access to mainstream center processes. This has got a lot of strength to it. We have had the freedom to develop connections and families that that do not match the still dominant white heterosexual two-parent nuclear family, which, by the way, I was raised in. Did a good job. I have no qualms about it. It's one model. But in this country, it is still sort of the dominant model. That's what the right wing wants to hang on to. There are other groups of people, by the way, different cultural and racial groups who don't have that model either. And oh gosh, okay, so real quick. So we have developed a whole lot of strength. We know what it's like to develop a family of friends, not just to have a bunch of friends, but to develop a family of friends. And in my family, we developed it certain ways. We had 2 moms, no dad. And no dad, yeah, do they have a sperm donor? Sure. Did they have another egg? My kids are adopted, yes. But they have no dad. But we have, what we've imported in as family, in addition to my siblings, is our children had 8 godparents. That is not a religious term. That is a question of people who were willing to step in and be directly related to my kids, 2 of whom are sitting right here in the front row. So that was how we built our family. There are other people here who have, in the city, who have 2 moms and 2 dads and other people involved. So there are other people who develop their families in different ways. My kids have no dad, those kids have 2 dads. Okay. And other people have done all kinds of things. Kids sometimes take two women, I'll just use that, together, and they are committed to each other, and sometimes they are both what they call equal parents, even if they don't do the same work. But Other times they say they have one parent and one loving adult who parents. That person is not a parent. That can be fine. The kids are all right. No matter what you thought of that movie, the phrase is the kids are all right. The kids can do well in all these. We have tremendously creative structures that we have built that are not following the model. So in your packet you were given a thing about homophobia, or Dorothy Riddle's thing on here. And I want to say what the very last one under stage 8 was nurturance on another, it was a different, she used a different word that I like better, celebration. She didn't ask me. So what we are doing is going to take, what we need to do is to take our creative ways of developing family, and we are indeed, the right wing's right, we are a threat. We are bringing all of that, as we have the option to move from the margin to the center. We are bringing with us all our lived experiences of how we've done it differently. And yes, we are, along with other racial groups, other cultural groups, changing the very nature of what it means to be family. We are a threat. Thank you.
Well, the reason that Nancy got in touch with me to be a part of this panel was due to my work with the Love Under Fire campaign, which is in its second year. Primarily, the Love Under Fire campaign was created to create more of a grassroots fire, if you will, for love, as Robin Shahara spoke to us about, is that the legislature and the court of law are very strongly impacted by the sentiment that is held out in the public. And so we decided that that's probably where we should start, and having conversations about that. And through our conversation, she found out that I have a strong faith background. I come from a devout Baptist household, foot stomping, hand clapping, raise the roof. I come from that. And a lot of the social justice work that I've been doing since a teenager has been an outgrowth of my faith. That is my faith that leads me to do what I do. In the same way that Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a Baptist, what he did was an outgrowth of his faith. And so I just wanted to briefly talk about how religion plays into this, and then I'll move on to what direction the Love Under Fire campaign and other grassroots activists are leading in, and ways that those of you who wish to get involved can do that. This is, if you've lived in Georgia long enough, you've come to realize that this is the Bible Belt. And what that means is that while the Constitution says separation between church and state, that is not a complete reality here in Georgia. Faith leaders or people who are strong in their faith are very much bedfellows with politics here. And for the longest time, it is changing. Those have been individuals who are from what you would call the traditional church, or some people call the faith, the right, or whatever, And so it's anything that is contrary to those traditional concepts have had a hard fight here in the state. And as Dr. Barrett spoke about, is that the marriage equality is a threat to that concept, that way of life. And so for that reason, while many of us may not be associated with a traditional church, or we're not churchgoers or whatever, and that's okay, we cannot escape that it's going to be a faith fight as well. And for those who are churchgoers in their faith, marriage is really a deeply religious hallmark of your faith life, right along with baptism and funerals and christenings or whatever. Marriage is a legal construct, but is also a religious faith construct, whereas that it's not just between a husband and a wife or two spouses. It's husband and wife, and God is a part of that. That's the way that it's done whenever you go into a wedding, and that's holds true for Jews and Muslims as well. And what is happening right now is that the Christian, because that's what I know, is in a period of a civil war, if you will, and kind of always has been, but is reaching a head right now. And the two factions of the church that are bumping heads up against each other is the traditional church, where they hold family as God, I don't know, this bearded bodybuilder up in the sky or whatever. And below God, you have the husband. If you imagine the bigger umbrella, you have the husband. And below the husband, you have a smaller umbrella of the wife. The husband takes care of the wife. And below that wife umbrella, you have the kids. The wife is the manager of the household and all that. And that's how it's set up for them. For the progressives, we've been moving where there's inclusivity, where everybody is invited to be at the table that Jesus had or whatever. And whereas now that we're even opening up to people who come from different faith backgrounds, to Muslims and Buddhists and whoever, and we're taking the message of the Bible back to the only thread that is consistent throughout the Bible, and that is love. And that's what's happening right now, and that's how it's played into that. And the third point I want to say is that the Constitution already provides religious liberties. When marriage equality reaches the state of Georgia, no church will be required to officiate your wedding. Now, when you go to a court of law to get your marriage license, you can certainly, they be acting on behalf of the county, have to offer you that. But as far as if you want to have a wedding or whatever, if you're in the middle nowhere, Georgia, you may need to come to Atlanta or to another a progressive city center to have your wedding, or shipping a pastor, to do that for you. So that's what I wanted to talk about with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Last but not least, Conrad.
You can hear me okay? Awesome. First and foremost, why I'm here and why this event is important to me is because I'm a Quaker, and a lot of my social justice and activist work have come from being Quaker and going through Quaker youth programs when I was younger, and I want to support the young people who are doing that today. And I don't know if you've seen it, but in the cafeteria area, the students have signed pledges for why they would be silent for LGBT youth, which was an action that I did in high school, and I'm so happy to see it's extended to other kinds of bodies, including immigrant bodies, and just tying in all sorts of social justice work under this Day of Silence. But I'm also here to participate in this conversation with wonderful people and trying to understand who I am, because when I grew up and came out in, when I was 12, so 10 years ago, gay marriage was gay rights, and equality meant getting married. And so any pride parade, any sort of community function that I went to, there were equality stickers, there was HRC, there was marriage equality at the forefront. And, being a young person, I got very rallied up about that. And of course, I'm not at any sort of marrying age, or rather, I don't feel obligated to think about myself as getting married anytime soon. And that's not to begrudge anyone who is in that situation and who's facing the challenges every day and the current struggle of what it means to face, will I be able to adopt my child, or will I be able to receive benefits with my spouse? And what I'm faced with is the sort of dilemma of what does it mean to be gay and queer, and what does our justice really look like when not all of us are in the same boat of needing marriage equality to fulfill our lives. Because when I was in school, I was working with other queer and LGBT students, and the forces that we were facing were different kinds of violences on our body, from having 30% of all suicides in ages 10 to 24 are LGBT students, with trans students not being accounted for. 9 out of 10 LGBT students will report bullying, and the statistics go on from LGBT students being 40% more likely to be attacked by families, 4 times more likely to be homeless, and 30% more likely to use substance abuse. And I have to thank my friend Gab for doing the current research on that, because unfortunately it hasn't changed much from when I was in high school. And so a lot of what I was working on was education and helping queer kids come into a space where they felt supported and didn't feel the pressure of, bullying or wanting to commit suicide. And I knew who I was helping then, and now I'm not so sure about marriage, because when I think about my prospects of ever getting married to my partner, if that ever happens, we're both still filing under the poverty line, but our taxes are, we're filing joint, so that's very happy and affirming. And when I think about if I want to get involved in marriage campaigns or working on marriage equality as an issue, now that I'm not in high school facing the kind of violence that I was facing, I think about who, if I donate my money, if I donate my time volunteering, who is really benefiting from marriage equality and whose net worth is going up because they're getting married, because it's not mine. I have friends and family who love me and who will love me and my partner, and I have my elders to show me that queer people have been configuring themselves in meaningful relationships and supporting each other financially and logistically for decades before me. I know that marriage is not going to be this check mark that says freedom from homophobia in the United States of America. 2 minutes, cool. And so I'm conflicted, because at some point I do want to think about myself in a committed relationship with one or more partners, and I think about how joining marriage as the institution in the United States is going to affirm that, or if it's going to mold my experience into something that isn't quite queer, is maybe more homonormative, and it's all at the same time happening around Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That's where I really plugged in, was, oh, so gay people can go fight in wars and kill people abroad, and as a Quaker, that just didn't jive with me at all. And so here I am reconciling what it means to understand that there are queer people in high school, and we can extend that argument to there are queer people on the street who are homeless, there are queer people who are trying to immigrate into this nation, there are queer people who are poor or facing police brutality, and is marriage equality going to be what brings those people up in the world? Is that what's going to make true equality and true social justice? I'm not sure.
Right, thank you. So we're talking about marriage equality, and I want to just throw this question out to you to have a conversation about. So, is marriage equality a win or lose issue?
So can I jump in?
Sure.
Okay.
1 minute.
Yeah. So what I didn't talk about in my opening that I do want to talk about for a minute is, so I was a plaintiff in a lawsuit. I guess it ended in 1997, I guess. Filed in 91, and it was within the context of employment. I had been hired to be a lawyer in the Attorney General's office here in Georgia. Michael Bowers was the Attorney General. And when he found out that my former partner and I were having a commitment ceremony, I lost my job. And the case had its major ups and major downs. It ended on a major down, unfortunately. But I want to talk about the major up piece, because to me that is an answer to your question. So the case really was very much about gay marriage. And we were at a hearing at the appeals court, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we had lost in the district court, except we had gotten one really exciting ruling, which was that gay and lesbian relationships deserve to be protected by the United States Constitution. And so even though we had lost below, it was reported in the paper, front page, this huge win, because and it was huge. It was like the first time that a federal court had said gay relationships should be protected by the United States Constitution. That's big, all right? So we get to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we've got our hearing, and there are 3 judges, 2 men and a woman. And the woman was Judge Kravitch. And she talked about marriage. Like every time she said the word, she like pursed her lips. I mean, her tightness around the idea of women having a committed relationship and a marriage ceremony, you could feel it all through the room. And I mean, and there were even points where she sort of was joking with the lawyer for Bowers, almost mocking the term. And so we had our hearing, and it was horrible. And the decision came down, and I actually want to quote from it. So the decision comes down 4 months later, maybe 6 months later, and she ruled in our favor. And it wasn't just that she ruled in our favor. I don't want to actually read you her language, because it was like somewhere between the time that she pursed her lips in dismay and wrote this, she saw Jesus. You know, I don't really know what happened, but she said, intimate associations involve choices to enter into and maintain certain intimate, these choices must be secured against intrusion by the state, because the role of such relationships is central to our constitutional scheme. Family relationships, which by their nature involve deep attachments and commitments to the necessarily few other individuals with whom one shares not only a special community of thoughts, experiences, and beliefs, but also distinctively personal aspects of one's life, exemplify this category of protected associations. A relationship that fits these descriptions is no less entitled to constitutional protection just because it is between individuals of the same sex. So ultimately we lost the case because this ruling, and I remember my lawyer saying when it came down, she got really nervous, and I said, why? And she said, it's too good. The court isn't ready for it. And in fact, the full 11th Circuit took the case. They did not let this ruling stand, and they overturned it. But gets back to education, and it gets back to what does winning mean. And I think that every time we get out in public, and it's not just us sitting up on the stage, it's every single person out there, LGBT, straight, just living with integrity, and letting the world see who we are and understanding that we're humans, that's a win.
Any other thoughts on that?
I have the perfect faith that marriage equality is indeed coming to Georgia. It is just a matter of when and how soon. And right now, we have the opportunity of making that relatively soon within the next 1 to 2 years. My argument has always been that it may come that way, that the Supreme Court may settle this all for us within the next 1 to 2 years, but understanding that they're influenced by what's happening in the states, and for that reason, change begins at home. If we want to have any kind of influence on what the Supreme Court is going to do, we need to work on Georgia. And right now, we have the Lambda Legal has just launched a case against the state of Georgia to sue it over Georgia's marriage ban, and we have some legislators promising to begin the repeal legislation against Georgia's marriage ban next year. So we're coming at it at both ends. What we're needing from the people is to really plug in and support this. Talk to it to your family, to your coworkers or whatever. Have them begin communicating with their legislators and begin changing minds. We can do this. We had this fight more recently 10 years ago, and it did not go well for us. And I was not here, but I did talk to a lot of people who were here and were very active in that fight. And there were some who were in the trenches, but we did not come together as a community, and we paid the price for that. And it is my hope that we learn that lesson, and that throughout the next 2 years that we really come together as a community. If we do that, we're going to win this. I guarantee it. And so we just cannot afford to play around like we did in 2014, but we need to really put all hands on deck because we can nail this. And time is very sensitive for a lot of families with people who are alien, don't have another 10 years to wait. And so if we have a possibility to make that within 2 years, we ought to do it.
I want to go back to this thing that you have on Dorothy Riddle, and she's got four positive levels of attitude. But these are, you realize, are all some version of homophobic responses, except the very last one. So the marriage part is being put out here under stage 5, which is support, which is a civil liberties position, which I am all for. I am all for getting those civil liberties. I mean, I want to be very clear about that. At the same time, though, the success, from my point of view, is going to be on whether or not, as a larger community, we end up transforming the whole concept of marriage and of family. So that if we move only to the center and get that, and don't at the same time really bring all of our creative energies that we put into changing the very institutional structures, then something will be lost. And that's a phrase that goes through my mind a lot about marriage equality. Something's lost and something's gained. And we need to make sure that it doesn't get lost. All our experience doesn't get lost, and we end up transforming the structure. And furthermore, Conrad, Harris, these folks who, as I began to say, I'm aging out of this, conversations and dialogues. For those of you who are my age, were we talking about trans folks? When I was coming out, this didn't exist. We weren't talking about that. So that at the same time that we're doing something that is toward the center, away from the margin, we need all kinds of voices still out on the margin, still creating and bringing all the information we need to have back into the larger community at the same time. And if we can do that and transform the center at the same time, then I think we've succeeded.
Okay, great. Conrad.
Yes. And now just to speak to a little bit about the trans folks and marriage. I'm not an expert, and if there's anyone who stands up and wants to correct me, please. I think that marriage equality is winnable. But we have to remember, like, which families are going to win in marriage equality, which are two-parent, same-sex families. And in some states, if you're trans and you go through all of the rigmarole of identifying yourself as trans with the state, which can include, countless psychology visits, you have to live and demonstrate your gender to the state. Some states will not change your birth certificate. So, I know in Tennessee, if you were assigned female at birth and you transition and identify as male and you have a male partner, you can get married. And that's gay marriage, but their birth certificate says that they were assigned female. Whereas in states where if you are assigned female at birth, transitioned into being male, your birth certificate is changed. But if they have gay marriage, then good for them.
Great, thank you. So we want to hear a couple of questions from the audience. But before we do that, I would like any final thoughts that you have. 1 minute. 1 minute. Any final thoughts for the audience?
I direct this question to Robin Shahar. The work of straight allies, they're very important to this. And I think there's two different kinds of straight allies. There's those who will speak affirming of you and about rights or whatever. And then there are those who are in it with us, that take on the burdens and play right along with them. And I understand that Robin Shar, she's the LGBT liaison to the mayor, who is now an outspoken advocate, and he says he's always been an advocate. But we understand that he's now is engaged to be married, and I'm very happy for him. And I would like to know if he is going to be the type of advocate that is with us in it, and will wait to have his nuptials until we all can get married, if you know.
He is not going to wait to have his nuptials. But, and what's interesting about him is he would not say that he has always been there with us in all aspects of what we're talking about. In fact, in marriage equality, he would very much say he was not. Now, when he was a state senator and a state congressman, he voted against the state Duma. I mean, he was on the right side of gay issues along the way, but on marriage equality, he was not comfortable. And he actually credits his father for kind of giving him a kick in the butt and sort of getting him to understand the importance of it. And he is now very much in favor of marriage equality, and he is the honorary co-chair of Southerners for Freedom to Marry and Mayors for Freedom to Marry. So he is very sincere in terms of being there with us. Does that mean he will put off his own marriage? No. But it doesn't mean that he's less sincere in terms of being part of making this happen.
And I understand his chief of staff was also pushing him.
Very, very much. Yeah, Candace Berg was right on it.
Okay. Yep. Any other final thoughts?
Well, I was going back to my notes. This is totally a different piece of this. But the other thing that I think, you know, we all have to watch our own internalized homophobia. You know, that's going to be with me. All the work I've done is going to be with me all my life. And one of the places I watch it show up when I'm going back to the children, the thing with children again, is the internalized belief, even when people get married to each other, that a child cannot have two equal parents of the same sex. So the parents believe they give more power to the one who gave birth or to the one who's the legal parent. The society comes and says, who's the real parent? And if you answer that question, you've worked out of their paradigm. So you're not confronting that because you believe on some level that's true. I watch that happen all the time, and it shows up as soon as you hit a divorce. And, well, who's the real parent here? It's our own internalized homophobia. The other part of that is that society still doesn't know what to do with all these eggs and sperms and wombs that are floating around unless if they're not elevated to a social parent, I call it. The social parent is not the same as the egg and the sperm unless you want it to be, which is just fine. So, but people will say, okay, so to my kids, who's your dad? The answer is they don't have one. But it's really hard to keep answering that question. And both the kid's other mom and I had been out for decades. And we didn't know what being out meant until we walked into a restaurant, you know, with very verbal 3- and 4-year-olds. Because I can go to a restaurant and I sit there and I don't, people don't say, oh, you're gay, or, you know, lesbian. They don't do, but you can't do that when they're going, mama, mother, dada, 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 you know. So you don't have any place to hide anymore. But it's really hard to get into your insides and get every little bit of that sort of pulled out. It's hard work.
Yes, thank you. Last thought.
Yes. I was stricken by the word trade that Susan mentioned, and thinking about marriage equality or marriage in general as a trade and the kind of history of marriage of people trading daughters and sisters for you know, different ways of keeping families together and different ways of keeping wealth together, and drawing on those histories and understanding that there is an economy to marriage and understanding that gay people joining that, what does that mean? But also, what are we trading when we go from being very grassroots in the early 90s, mid 80s, 70s, 60s, I'm sure everyone can remember those histories, to being much more of a corporate and unified or solidarity HRC National Task Force type of social justice work, and what kind of trades are going on in order to make that happen.
All right, let's give our panelists a hand. I hope that this has been stimulating conversation for you, and I understand we have a few minutes to take just a couple of questions, maybe 2 burning questions from the audience. Burning questions. Yes, Sally.
not plugged in.
As a child psychiatrist, our Child Psych Academy has asked our sexual orientation committee to review the policy that we already have against discrimination. The pediatrics group came out with a policy, and I wondered if you could succinctly state, if you haven't already, exactly what the advantage is for children in a family for marriage equality. What will marriage equality do for children being raised by gay, lesbian, transgender families?
Two big things, one of which is money, access to resources, health care of their partner, all those, I think it's 1,007 laws or something like that. So there's the potential for the financial, economic security of that family structure to be stronger. The second thing is the validation, my family's okay, that kind of thing. That's about it in terms of the kids directly. When I got up there, I wrote down some of the foundation of all of this is whether or not both socially and legally homosexuality is a disease, you know. And I went back and looked at it, was in 1975 or 74 that homosexuality got taken out of the DSM. Do you know what the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, it got removed by the psychiatrist as a mental disorder. 2012, trans got removed. And that's like when you're saying legal things. These are things that have power. These ideas have power. You're sick, crazy, whatever. That got removed. Yeah. There's no way people are going to be able to move forward a whole lot with the legal part if they have this high craziness being put on top of them as being labeled. Yes. But the kids, the phrase is that for me, the kids are all right. I have watched incredible numbers of family situations. It's amazing what kind of family structures I've watched be put in place. And the kids are all right, and that's the fruit in the bowl, you know. There are bad LGBT parents, there are bad heterosexual parents. There's good. I mean, there's part of that you can't do anything about. But the kids, the incredible range of family structures they live in, and the kids are all right.
Great. One last point. Yes.
The other thing that's interesting is in the Windsor case, the swing justice, the justice who was the 5th vote out of 9 in favor of striking down DOMA, Justice Kennedy, a big push for him was, how about the kids? He was all about, don't these kids have rights?